Consumed. Westlake Trilogy Book 1 by J.C. Jarrett. Chapter 10. Unwelcome Guests. Alistair de Crystal led his small troop of 7 around a bend in the road, with the forest standing high on both of their sides. The morning sun peeked through the trees, occasionally stealing their vision. As they cleared the last bend in the road, the forest fell away, revealing the acres of rolling fields of unused farmland. Lord Alistair de Crystal pulled his horse to a stop, leaning forward on the saddle horn. He surveyed the land before him. Rubeus stopped his horse beside his lord's. "There sets the house, my lord, just as I said it would," the small rat-faced Rubeus said, pointing toward the large one-story farmhouse. "This is nice land." Alistair spoke absently. "Yes, my lord, I suppose," Rubeus said as his lord tapped his heels to his horse, getting the small troop moving once more. Alistair was all smiles and excitement at the thought that his long search would soon be over. Her red gold hair fell over her face as she bent to pick up the small basket of potatoes. Turning with the basket, she watched her daughter for a second as she finished filling her basket with yellow squash. The mother and daughter had been tending to this small garden for a few years now, providing the family with abundance of food. Setting the basket on the porch, Elisa tossed her hair back from her face, watching Jana carry the heavy basket with ease. Setting hers beside her mother's, the girl stood pointing toward the road. "Mother, is that father?" Elisa took her eyes from her daughter to see several horsemen approaching her home, kicking up a plum of dust in the distance. "Jana, go get your blade," the mother said calmly as she picked up her silver long sword that had been leaning in its scabbard on the porch railing. The redhead young woman dashed into the house and returned seconds later, strapping her long sword around her waist. She looked up to see her mother standing in the dirt road in front of the house, her silver sword hanging relaxed from the scabbard in her hand with her light green dress blowing in the wind. Jana stepped forward and joined her mother, the two women drawing strength from each other. The hot sun beat down on Elisa's bare neck as she looked down at the blade resting in her hand. A small smile turned up the corners of her mouth at the memory the sword triggered. She remembered the day that Peyton had strapped the blade around her waist, of how he had promised to teach her in its use. He had never not kept a promise to her. 8 was the number of riders she counted as they neared. Elisa looked at her brave, skilled daughter, saw a bit of fear and apprehension in her young eyes. She thought of the first real combat she had seen and knew what the girl was feeling. "Do not make a move until I do," she said. "If we can solve this with words, we will. But if not, then do not hold back. Do not hesitate to kill. Because they will not." The worried mother finished. The horsemen stopped in front of the women. The men looked down at them, and most wore amused grins on their faces. The man that seemed to be the one in charge of this group was the only one that did not. His dark hair and thin mustache and goatee were neatly trimmed and his clothing well tailored, as was the rat-faced man to his left, but the other 6 was rugged and dirty, with the hilts of weapons clearly visible. "What's your business here?" The lead rider, his dark gaze seemed as if it could bore a hole into her, spoke in a smooth, well-educated voice. "Greetings, ladies," he said as he dismounted his horse, then bowed low to the ground toward them. Elisa thought this may be her chance to take a swing at his neck, but she stayed her hand. The women watched as the others dismounted, the thin, rat-faced man rubbing his legs trying to return feeling to them. "Again, what business do you have here?" the fiery redhead said with authority. "My name is Alistair de Crystal. I am looking for Rand and Jana Westlake. My information shows the Westlakes own this land. Are they here?" At the sound of Rand's name brought a sad look came across Jana's face. She still sorely missed her grandfather. "I'm sorry Rand has passed and his wife sometime before. So you do not have any business here, and if you wouldn't care, please get back on your horses and head out from here," Elisa demanded. "No, my dear, we will not be leaving, and I am very sorry that it must go this way." DeCrystal spoke in an even almost bored tone. With these words, the 6 rugged men moved toward the women, who drew her blade, its edge flaring blue as she dropped the scabbard in the dirt. The men seemed to look a little put off by the glowing magic sword as they watched both women drop into defensive stances, Jana having drew her weapon as well. "What do you want from us?" she screamed as the men circled the mother and daughter. "From you, my dears. Nothing. Now that Rand and Jana are gone, we will get what we want from your husband. One way or another." "Make it quick, men," the well-dressed DeCrystal said with no emotion at all in his voice. Suddenly a cry of pain cut through the air, along with a spray of crimson. The dead man stayed on his feet another few seconds before collapsing, reveling Elisa standing there, her silver blade stained red with the man's blood. The other 5 looked at their dead comrade, a neat hole punch right through his heart-seeping blood, and wondered if it was just a lucky shot. They were wrong. The blade flashed blue as it arcs toward her next target. Raising his broadsword in defense, he never even had the chance to display a look of shock as the blue glowing blade cut cleanly through his steel blade, burying deeply into his skull. Jana's long sword spun in a shimmering blur as she deflected the several jabs of the short spear her attacker was wielding. Thinking the young warrior distracted another of the men, brought his axe up over his head for a killing blow. Sidestepping incredibly fast, she dodged the thrust of the spear and watched with a little revulsion as it sunk deep into chest of the axe wielder that had been behind her. Controlling her emotion, she brought her blade down, severing the shaft of the spear right behind the spearhead. Leaping into the air, she spun, throwing out a kick, her hard boot connecting with the severed shaft, driving it out of sight in the now dead man's chest. The brilliant blue blade flashed again as Elisa brought it around, deflecting a huge blade from her. Then ducking quickly, the battle axe of another attacker passed through her flying hair, trimming off several inches. Kicking out with the left foot, she caught the leg of the overextended axe wielder, dropping him to his knees. Leaping quickly into the air, she just managed to dodge the other spearman as he slashed out for her legs. Landing softly behind the axe wielder, she gripped her marvelous blade in both hands. Swinging with all her might, she watched as the magical blue flash turned purple for a brief second, as the blade sliced cleanly through the neck of the axe wielder, sending his head rolling to the ground. The looked at the now ruined spear that had become a staff in his hands. He had watched his now dead ally fall at the feet of the redhead girl, whose ice-blue eyes now bored into him with a look of hatred. Dropping the spear shaft, he drew a short sword and dagger from his belt. "You're dead, girl," he said, trying to scare her, as bad as he was right now. The dagger shot out, going for her belly, only to meet a flash of silver. As the man pulled back his dagger hand, he noticed to his surprise that there was no dagger, or hand for that matter. He looked at the bleeding stump of his left hand in disbelief and never felt the blade of the blue-eyed girl pass through his exposed throat, ending his confusion and life. Elisa took her eyes away from her daughter, seeing that she was holding her own, and raised them to the last 2 attackers. Crimson coated her blade, and her enemy's blood dripped from her face. The men were scared. The rat-faced man stepped forward, passing the scared men. One hand flashed with a light of its own as a ball of energy shot from it, hitting Jana square in the chest. The young woman was lifted off her feet by the force of the magical attack and thrown nearly 40 feet from the house, landing hard on her back. "Jana!" the worried mother screamed and started toward her daughter, only to be blocked by the rat-faced wizard. Rubius raised his hands and they began to glow. The warrior tore from the wood, his body drenched in sweat, as he willed himself onward. Peyton pushed himself with everything he had. He knew that if he did not make it home, his family may not survive. He looked up to see the house ahead, no more than 300 yards away. His spirit raised, he was almost there. The elation gave him a burst of energy, causing him to drift into a full sprint across the rolling fields. His heart skipped several beats as he spotted the horses standing in front of the house. Then the flash of blue caught his attention. He saw the silver long blade glide through the air, leaving a blue streak behind in its wake, as Elisa cleanly decapitated the man before her. Peyton screamed in terror as he witnessed the glowing ball of energy hitting his daughter, causing her to soar through the air, landing in the tall grass. He silently prayed she was still alive. He feared for Elisa now he had faced off against wizards before, and he was no stranger to their magical tricks and attacks. His legs burned and his breathing came in ragged breaths as he pushed himself to go even faster. He had to get there. He had to save them. No more than 100 yards from his beautiful wife, he saw the wizard step toward her. He outstretched his hand as a white light flashed from his palm toward the red-headed beauty. Elisa felt the air press in around her. She could not move a muscle. Then the sound of her silver blade panging off the ground hit her ears. She knew it was over. She was paralyzed by magic and now defenseless. She closed her eyes, preparing herself for the final blow, when a far-off scream touched her ears. Her eyes burst open, her breath catching in her chest as she beheld the sight of Peyton, her beloved husband running with all his might toward her. She knew she was saved. "No!" The voice of the warrior echoed across the farmland, pulling the attention of men from Elisa. De Crystal pointed at the sprinting warrior. "Stop him!" The remaining two fighters charged at the warrior, blocking his advancement. Blades drawn, Peyton was not there. He had given completely over to the warrior within. The two men charged in, not knowing what they faced. Immediately, a cry of pain tore from beginning battle. Alistair grinned at the speed to which his men dispatched the warrior, but his smile quickly faded as he saw blood shoot in a great arc from the open necks of his men. Then a flash of white on the forest edge took Alistair's attention as a highborn broke from the wood, running toward the battle. "Quickly get the girl inside, Rubius." Raising his hand, Elisa floated from the ground, gliding silently through the door. She wished she could scream for Peyton, but the spell still held her in place. The slender blades shot out, their fine edges slicing through the men's throats instantly. Both was dead before they hit the ground. The warrior glanced over his shoulder to see Jander running at an unbelievable speed toward him. A smile pasted the warrior's lips, with the thought of having the highborn on his side. Peyton ran for the house, seeing his wife and her attackers moving through the doorway. "Take care of him," Lord de Crystal said, raising his voice for the first time, after entering through the doorway of the farmhouse. Rubius nodded. Holding his hand up, several white balls of energy flew from his fingers toward the running Peyton. Peyton never slowed. He leaped into the air, his body becoming parallel to the ground. Spinning, he passed between all of the wizard's attacks completely uninjured. The look of fear on the wizard's face was undeniable. Nobody had ever dodged that attack before. Left with the decision to face the rampaging warrior or retreat to the house, he never hesitated. Landing with the grace of a dancer, the warrior charged the door at full speed and managed to get his foot in the doorframe before Rubius could get it closed. The wizard pushed with all his might against the warrior, but years of training and fighting had honed the man's slender frame into a muscled powerhouse the wizard could not compare to. The door began to slowly slide open, forcing Rubius back. A worried look of fear that had been on the wizard's face began to become terror. This close, he would never get off a spell before the enraged warrior ended him. Pain. Pain shot up his spine as he saw blood explode out onto the door, splattering the face of the surprised wizard. The warrior staggered as he looked down to see the wide blade of a short sword protruding from his chest. The blade suddenly twisted. Peyton was sure it had torn him in two. Blood bubbled up, flowing from the wounded man's mouth and down his chin. Peyton heard the sound of his blades clattering to the flooring, but had no memory of releasing them. Rubius pulled the door open with an evil, blood-dripping grin. The wounded warrior hung there on his feet as Jander's strangely accented voice whispered in his ear. "I'm sorry, my friend. It's only business." Peyton's ice-blue eyes fell upon Elisa, still held in the wizard's magic. The anguished woman's face was scrunched up as tears poured from her emerald eyes. She knew there was no surviving the grievous wound. She was watching her husband's death. Elisa's heart pounded against her chest as if it was trying to burst from her ribcage. She wanted so badly to go to him, speak to him, or just scream in frustration, but she could do nothing while in the spell but watch helplessly as he died. The thought of what would happen to Elisa and Jana if he fell caused him more pain than the short sword ever could. Peyton tried to take a step, and to the onlooker's shock, he managed a small one. As he raised his foot for another, his balance escaped him as he pitched over, hitting the floor hard, breaking his nose. He never felt it. Elisa watched the ever-expanding pool of blood form under her husband, unable to even attempt to comfort him. Shock showed in her eyes as she saw the warrior's hand come up, pressing against the floor as he pulled his feet under himself slowly and stood. This caused the men in the room to back away from the dying warrior in fear. Sheer willpower and fear for his family put the man back on his feet. Slowly he stumbled forward to the well-dressed man. Jander's long-fingered hands grabbed his shoulder and the hilt to the short sword as it still stuck through the man. Pushing violently, he half-carried the warrior to stand before Lord Alistair de Crystal. "Impressive, Peyton. Very impressive. Now tell me where you have hidden it?" Peyton understood the well-dressed man's word, but had no idea what he wanted. He had very little of real value beside his family. The warrior's head turned about, trying to see outside for a sign of his daughter, but she still laid motionless in the grass. What is? I don't know what you want from us." As the warrior spoke, blood seeped from his mouth, slurring his voice. "Oh, come now, Peyton. Do not make me start hurting your family. That always gets so messy. And this is messy enough already." At those words, the warrior within flooded back into control. Peyton's muscles tensed in an attempt to strike out at the well-dressed man. Jander's hands, still on the man, felt him tense. The highborn's fingers tightened as he slammed the warrior into the mantle of the fireplace before he could strike. Tearing the wooden mantle from its mounting, scattering a lantern and a few other odds and ends across the floor. As Peyton slammed into the stone of the fireplace, his head coming up, striking a large painting of the farm his aunt had painted, with his head knocking it from the wall to the floor. The edges of Peyton's vision darkened as he collapsed along with the painting. The short sword's hilt stood straight up from the wounded man's back as he slid down the fireplace to a sitting position. The only thing holding him upright was the worked stone. "Bloodied and beaten, to the point of near death, won't let me question the man. Will it, Jander?" Alistair's smooth voice said as he eyed the highborn angrily. As the well-dressed man turned to look at the highborn, his eyes fell upon a small, strange hole in the wall that blended in almost perfectly with a knot in the polished wood wallboard. The hole had been hidden by the large painting, and after a careful inspection, he could make out the outline of a small, square door. Alistair ran his finger around the door and over the hole as excitement filled him. "Rubius, work your magic." The thin, rat-faced man moved to stand before the mantel. He stared intently at the hole and worked his fingers and hands in intricate motions, while mumbling arcane words of power. Elisa's eyes never left her husband on the floor. She could no longer tell if he was breathing or not. She felt sick and confused. Why was this happening, she thought. She tried in vain to see her daughter outside, but was unable to see her from where she was. The pressure around her lessened, allowing her to look around the room. Some relief filled her at seeing the grievously wounded warrior take a shuddering breath. She hoped he survived long enough for these killers to leave. Suddenly, the pressure returned, holding her fast once again. The air sizzled around the fingers of the wizard with yellow arcs of power, as tendrils of shimmering air snaked from his hands toward the hole. The magical air poured into the hole as a small click resounded in the wall. A small compartment no more than a foot square opened slowly. Alistair's black eyes lit with excitement as he reached his hand into the secret opening. Slowly, he withdrew a piece of cloth folded around an object. Peyton managed to turn his head toward Elisa. The terrified woman breathed a sigh of relief that he was not yet dead. Her lip began to quiver, though, at the look in her love's eyes. It was the look of a defeated man, and she had never seen that look upon the warrior's face ever before. Alistair unfolded the cloth, gently revealing a gold-bound orb that seemed to be made of glass or crystal. Within this orb swirled a multicolor chaos that pulsed with its own light. His hands shook with excitement as the corners of his mouth turned up in a grin. At last, after all these years, Rubius, we have it. Never taking his eyes from the object, Alistair started toward the wizard. Make it look like an accident. The wizard smiled as he reached into a vest pocket, pulling out a small metal box with a crank on its side. Tapping the top of the box with a finger, its lid sprang open with a loud snap. Holding the opened box in one hand, the rat-faced wizard began to speak in hushed tones, while he drew fiery arcane symbols in the air with the other. The wizard's voice raised to a crescendo as a small ball of fire flew from his fingers, landing straight in the box, its lid snapping loudly shut, catching the fire within. Rubius began to turn the small crank on the box, it making a small clicking sound with every rotation. When he finished, he placed the metal box on the small table beside a large leather chair, then turned to his lord, who still stood with his eyes still locked on the strange object. Should give us about 3 minutes, the wizard said to the preoccupied Alistair. Very good. Now get us out of here. The wizard began his casting again. When he finished, a shimmering magical portal stood in the middle of the room. Alistair looked at the highborn, who still watched over the warrior like he was waiting for him to attack. Jander, when we are gone, you are to clean up here. Dispose of the bodies outside with fire, then join us at the mountain keep. The lord said, finally taking his eyes from his prize. Then he stepped through the portal, quickly followed by Rubius. Leaving Jander alone with the wounded Peyton and Elisa, slowly he raised his eyes to her. I'm truly sore. Ah! The highborn screamed as the short sword slashed up at him. The point caught his chin, tearing a deep gash across the alabaster skin and into the golden left eye of the highborn. Staggering back, he caught a glimpse of the warrior stumbling forward at the effort of the blow, after having pulled the short sword from his own back. Peyton's rage-filled eyes met the fear-laden golden eye of Jander as he moved in toward the highborn. The two crashed into each other, slamming hard into the large front window. The window cracked under the pressure, but held in its frame. The warrior's hand tightened around Jander's thin neck as the short sword jammed to the hilt into the highborn's stomach. The two combatants stood bloodied face to bloodied face as the warrior's voice growled into the highborn's shocked expression. To hell with you! Elisa was suddenly free. She turned just in time to see her love slam the highborn into the window. Hope filled her as she thought they may survive this dreadful day. She watched with a small pang of satisfaction as the hilt of the short sword buried in Jander's guts, twisted violently. The highborn's scream filled the room, and then the room fell into an eerie silence as the loud click of the metal box echoed off the wooden walls. A fiery explosion erupted from the box, its shockwave throwing the screaming woman into the air, slamming her into the wall behind her. Unconsciousness took the beauty before she slid to the floor.